Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching from here at Bend Film Festival. And thank you for clicking on the Q&A link to watch my conversation with the director, Christina Antonakos-Volas. Thank you for joining us, Christina. I'm going to dive right in with my questions. So in your I think in your maybe bio or the film description, I saw that this film kind of came from some of the personal questions about identity and race that you had, and that's what initiated this film. So tell me a little about what were your questions, what were you looking for in embarking on this project?
Starting off with a big one. I think in my own case, I was raised in the Greek American community here in Seattle, which is where I'm based. I lived many years in New York and Berlin, obviously, as you can tell in the film, but I returned to Seattle a few years ago. And, you know, the Greek community is quite tight-knit and also in many ways organized around the Orthodox Church, which is a conservative church community. And as I became an activist as a young person and really became concerned around racial justice, gender justice, and other issues, I was really struggling with what my place was within this community that I was raised in, and my values for the larger world. So I kind of began this question around, for me, what was my relationship to whiteness, also as an ethnic person who didn't necessarily fit the traditional ideas of white American story, and also what was my responsibility to my community and my traditions, and also to change and towards building something new. So those were all the questions I was kind of grappling with, and it really led me looking in a lot of different places over many years. And ultimately, what's maybe the most kind of dramatic and interesting for other people is that I spent some time living in Greece, and while I was in Greece, started getting mistaken as an Albanian immigrant, because there are many, many Albanian immigrants in Greece, and I was speaking Greek but was making grammatical mistakes. And I didn't look to them like an American, a Greek American. And so I started to experience the kind of discrimination that Albanian immigrants in Greece experience, which is quite direct, and unfortunately, and that confrontation with the xenophobia in my quote unquote motherland, fatherland country, and the willingness of Greeks to defend that, Greeks in my own family to defend that kind of discrimination I was facing, really threw me into questioning national identity as a construct altogether, and wondering how we are going to move as a species beyond these ideas of the nation state, which actually are constructed on pseudoscientific ideas of race and nation and blood that we now know aren't real. So how do we actually evolve? We have global phenomenon, global problems that we're trying to actually address together, like the climate crisis. We know we have to actually figure out how to imagine ourselves as a global community. How do we actually start to deal with that? And I was looking at young people who actually I thought were offering some visions, not from a theoretical standpoint, but from actually having to confront these borders in their daily life, really face the limitations of our national identity constructions and offering something different. So that's a little bit of how I started on this journey. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious then, how did it lead into you finding your subjects? Did you already know them? Did you seek them out? How did it come together?
Yeah, I definitely sought them out. In the case of New York, which is where I lived, it was a much easier process. Sunny was somebody that I knew before embarking on the film through kind of extended activist networks and communities, so we were friends of friends. And the first time I met him, he immediately just shattered my own stereotypes I had about a community that I'd only seen represented in very superficial ways. You know, he was in this rock band, he was super political, we were having really amazing conversations, and I realized, even as somebody who had been involved in the sort of anti-racist work and living in big cities, I still hadn't confronted my own stereotypes about Sikhs and Sikhism until I actually had a real relationship with someone. And so Sunny was someone who before the film even began, had already challenged me to question ideas that I had. And so when I started working on this film, he was a person that I asked, could I interview him, and we could just explore these questions together and see. So with that film, I did interview more than 50 people to kind of identify the protagonists and to really just have conversations with people, and then see what was unfolding in their lives, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of insight into these questions, but maybe the timing wasn't right with what was going on in their lives, that there was really a story to follow. And then some people we tried to include their stories, and they actually got removed during the edit because of lack of time, unfortunately. So the 4 people who were in the film are the ones who were a combination of, had a lot of kind of insight, also were stories I felt like never really got told, that you don't really see, and needed to be kind of part of this conversation in a way that they haven't been.
So did you have any form of representation in mind when you were starting out? Because you have a musician, an artist, there's some family, there's an activist in there. Like, was that a conscious decision of like, I want to pick like certain ages, perspectives,
well, I mean, I was
religions?
looking at people who were my peers in terms of their age. I started this when I was in my mid-20s, and everyone in the film was within a few years of my age. So I was really looking at a generation who was questioning the boundaries and borders of belonging, and I didn't really care how they were doing it. It was only after a while of doing the sort of casting process that I realized it was the activists and the artists who actually really are questioning and pushing those boundaries. So in the beginning, I was sort of open. I was like, maybe I'll find someone who's working in medicine, and maybe I'll find someone working in science. But it turns out really, of course, there could be people in every discipline, but often the people who are willing to take the risk to push back against the expectations of society are the people who are doing that every single day, in what they engage with, and that's often artists and activists. So it was a funny thing that came after, rather than, especially because that's what I already was doing myself in my own life. So it's funny that I didn't recognize it. So that's what I was looking for. But yes, and in Berlin, I should say, I was drawn to Berlin a little bit accidentally. I received a fellowship. I knew a lot about what was going on in Germany in terms of migration, because I had begun studying these issues. But I didn't have any particular interest in Germany. I, like many Americans, I had really negative association with Germany because of World War II. I thought that language sounds so weird. I sort of accidentally learned to speak German, and spent years living there to make this film. Because Germany is the biggest immigration country in Europe, it has a huge influence on immigration policy all over the world. And it was really an important story that needed to be told. But it was funny because it kind of came to me. I received this fellowship to go there. And once I put the idea out there, many people said, make the film here. We need this film here. We need this kind of an intervention like now. And that's kind of how Berlin came to be. And so it was much more systematic because I wasn't German. I really had to do research and groundwork and contact many, many organizations. And that's kind of how I found the protagonists on the German side.
And did you set out to, like, did you have this vision to make a feature documentary film, or were you thinking maybe I'll do a few shorts, or maybe it'll be something else? Like, did that evolve as you were moving forward with it?
Well, yeah, it did evolve. In the very beginning, I made a short film that was an installation, that was really meant to be like a loop that people could come in and out and experience different voices. And that, while I was a student, and my professors were like, this is a film, Christina, you have a film here. And I was like, oh, I do? Oh no. I wasn't quite ready for the responsibility. But sort of the world like invited that to be reality somehow. And then once we started making, I put the idea out there to the world, and a lot of people responded. And I think that was sort of how I decided to commit to the process. Like, okay, I have this idea. Are there people who want to collaborate? Is this a thing that you feel like is needed and is important? And on the German side, I put the idea out, and suddenly I had 6 collaborators. We had a production company who wanted to work with us. We had sort of all this momentum, organizations who said, yes, we need this kind of intervention. And so in some ways it was responsive both to like my own questions, but also what I was receiving from the outside world. And then once it had that life of its own, it really just mushroomed. So it became a film, which you see if you've watched watched it in the festival, but we also have this online platform, and we created curriculum, and we've done workshops, and we have released a couple of short films. So all these things became part of this kind of unfolding project parallel to making the film. Yeah.
With films like yours, I kind of wonder, like, when you're making the documentary, do you feel like the biggest impact of the film is during the making of it, in your interactions with the filmmakers, just the fact of putting a spotlight on their lives? Or were you feeling like, okay, the main impact that I'm seeking with this film is once it reaches audiences? Like, you know, is it the interactivity with the subject that's like at the heart of documentary filmmaking, you feel? Or is it like once it's out there and it's connecting with audiences and creating conversations? Do you have any?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think that it points to what maybe we should be paying a lot more attention to, which is actually the impact of the process. I think there's so much attention in our culture, the US culture in general, about sort of end product and end result impact without actually being able to even observe and appreciate the process, which could be really impactful in a positive or negative way, but we don't necessarily pay attention to that. So in the case of this film, I think at the point that I realized it was going to be a feature and it was going to take many years, I became impatient about the idea of waiting to have an impact till the whole thing was done. So, so the impact wasn't just the collaboration with the protagonist, but also the work we were doing in the community while we were making the film, and the sort of feedback loop between working in the community and working on the film, and how that informed the process. But I think what I could never have really appreciated until after having completed a project that is this kind of longitudinal is the way that working on a film also impacts the people who you're making the film about, not just after the fact, but while you're doing it, and then again after the fact. So in the case of Miman, who, if you've watched the film, you know it's really a hard journey he goes on, and we end the film with him in a really rough, in a low place. When he actually saw the completed film, he was incredibly inspired, not, I think, just by seeing his own story and seeing his story in context, which was important, but also by seeing Tanya's story, where people were taking action about a similar issue in the US, and the relationship between these two struggles. And he got really motivated to start sort of increasing his activism again. And that's not something that I could have anticipated, that someone watching their own story on screen after the fact isn't just going to impact the audience, but it's going to affect the person who was in the film to also be able to appreciate their struggle, you know, in a new way. So I think that there's so many ways that if you're working with a lot of integrity, or trying to work with a lot of integrity, the impact is at every step. And I hope for filmmakers, but also for all of us who are working in some kind of way where we're trying to have a positive impact on whatever our sphere of influence is, like if we can value those small steps, we're actually going to be making far more change than if we wait till we can like measure it at the end, or if we devalue everything. Like a lot of people who worked on the film went on to work in immigrant rights and immigrant justice. You know, a lot of people who worked on the film, somebody wrote a book about belonging. There's all these kind of side things that came out of the process that I never could have hoped for or asked for or imagined. And that's really, really incredible. And also I had no idea. I was, you know, as we were making it, had no idea what was going to come next. Yeah.
Yeah, the power of documentaries is so multi-layered, I think. Speaking of impatience, I do want to know how the filming process went, like when and how often, and for what sorts of reasons did you decide to shoot, and how did it evolve? How did it evolve as it went, and when did you finally feel like, okay, this is mature enough now that I have to put this together and put it out there?
So we were really filming from 2007 until 2019, so over 12 years. I filmed most of the film myself, and the most intensive periods were probably in the middle of that, where there was the most overlap, because I hadn't started filming everyone in 2007, and in 2019 I was not filming everyone anymore. It was sort of half in the beginning and half at the end. So there was an overlap in the middle where I was just sort of like there was a lot of organizing my life around their lives and trying to be able to be places, different places in the world, which was a challenge in that I was also having to work a job to be able to pay my own bills. And yeah, so some of what made it into the film was also just what I could be there for logistically, being on 2 different continents, and also what they would allow me in for. Sometimes there were things that were, you know, maybe really important, but they were just really personal. And we talked about it, and they were just not comfortable having, for example, Tanya's grandmother died and she couldn't go back to the funeral, and her family was gathering, and somebody in the undocumented community was like, you really need to film this, Christina. You know, people who are undocumented, they can't be at their loved ones' funerals. But she was like, no, I just need to grieve with my family right now. So there are all kinds of things like that where you're just kind of in negotiation with each other around like, okay, this is important, but this is also your life, and what do you need, and what do I need, and how can we figure it out together? Yeah, there were definitely things that I thought were going to be more important than they were. And Tanya in particular was working on a campaign for some years that she ended up, anyway, the campaign itself did not end up featuring prominently in the film. We don't track all of the steps of the campaign in the way. So I have all these meetings, which are like, oh my God, how many meetings can a person watch, right? And then there's these small everyday moments, which turn out to be much more poignant than you necessarily realize in the moment that you're filming them, because they're just part of sort of the transitions between other events you're getting to or something like that. And then you realize that that's the moment that you actually feel them in their home, or you feel their, like the weight of what they're dealing with, or, you know, it's these in-between moments that end up being actually far more valuable than what seems like the action sometimes. Yeah.
And when did you like decide, okay, this is now like it all came to a place where I can now tie this up and make sense as a film?
Well, I started editing thinking we were done before the Trump election. We had started editing, and then we were not done. And we realized, oh my gosh, we have to go back and shoot, and we have to continue this story into the present. Not because the issues were not just as relevant before. That's part of the irony about it, is Trump didn't make this a crisis. It was already a crisis. Trump just, you know, made it more visible to a lot more people. You know, Obama had separated and deported more families in the US than any previous political administration. And so the idea that this was a Republican issue is totally an illusion. This is, in the United States, Democrats and Republicans have both played a role of criminalizing immigrants, of increasing deportation, all these things. So, but it did feel like, especially given that we were now in the Trump era, we had to reflect that moment together. Everybody, it was like we had to. So we kind of went back to shooting, and then, for example, Tanya said, okay, I'm working on getting my green card, and I want to show that. I want to show like also my resilience. So some of the things that are in the film were not because I thought they absolutely needed to be there, but also because people in the film wanted them to be in there. Yeah, so there were points along the way that I thought we had enough, and then the world continued to change, and their life changed, and it turned out to be more powerful to include those things and lose some of the things that were there before. Yeah.
So you weren't editing were you editing as you went along?
Yes, absolutely. We started editing probably as early as 2008. I started editing the very earliest footage that I'd shot in 2007 with an editor in Germany for a couple months. So we were editing parallelly the whole time, but not as intensively. You know, it would be like a couple weeks here, a month there, a couple weeks there, and then there came a time where we're like, okay, we're starting the edit, and then, oh my God, the world is upside down. What does that mean for the story? Maybe we need to go back and rethink this.
Mm-hmm. So do you have other 10-year projects underway?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I am developing another project, but I think for multiple reasons, definitely given how kind of multi-platform this project was. It was not just a 10-year film, but a real collaboration on all these other, doing installations and doing, like I said, workshops and curriculum. We were doing all these other things, and there was no way that I could do multiple film projects at the same time as working on all of that. But I think also when you, at least I should speak for myself, like I think there are filmmakers who make a film about something, and I think as I was working on this, I felt that I'm making about something that a film about something I'm a part of. I'm a part of this movement. I'm a part of this, like trying to build this world together. And it's not something I can just like put down and then take on the next thing. It's like I have to steward this out into the world in a way that actually honors the communities who are most deeply impacted by these issues, millions and millions of people in this country, but hundreds of millions of people around the world by totally unjust immigration and migration and refugee laws. So I'm trying to do it justice and really see it through out into the world, because the truth is, after working on something this long, you're tired and you're ready for a change. And it's easy to be like, okay, give me something shiny and new, but yeah, I'm moving slowly. I'm moving slowly to the next thing and taking my time to kind of do
Yeah,
this.
so you have withwingsandroots.org. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about that, because I know the social impact side of this documentary is just as important, if not more, than the documentary itself. So tell us about that. But you are continuing to make documentaries, whether about the same subject or something else, right?
Right. Yes. Yes, I am. Yes. And do you want me to say something about that, or do you want me to tell you about With Wings and Roots?
You can tell me what your next project is about if you wish. Yeah. And do tell me about withwingsandroots.org.
Yeah, so withwingsandroots.org it's an initiative that's based, in Germany and the US, that is about engaging and reframing the migration debates. And we have an interactive historical timeline where you can look at immigration history for both countries, but it really is an intersectional immigration history about also how the ideas of race have been constructed, how people who've been here through forced migration have been impacted by these same questions of citizenship and belonging. We have curriculum that you can download if you're an educator or, in school, out of school educator and want to work with the material in your classes. We have a story collection from all these other interviews I conducted to find the protagonists. And then people can upload their own story. If you watch the film and you feel touched by these issues and you want to share your story with us, you can upload it and we will share it either on our social channel or on our website. And it's always expanding, and really this has been a collaboration of scholars, activists, students, people who are just care about these issues. So if anybody in this audience is either interested to bring the film to the community or to collaborate with us in some way, we're always open to those conversations. That's how this work has really unfolded. And we kind of are organized around this question of how can we reimagine belonging? How can we build a world where belonging is really like structured for everyone, instead of having so many people excluded from being able to fully participate. So that's With Wings and Roots. The project I'm working on is called Amazonia. It's about Amazon's takeover of Seattle, but it's sort of a metaphor for the global economy. And I live in a co-housing collective that happens to be surrounded by the Amazon campus. So it's a really kind of place-based look at it, but also kind of trying to explore those questions. Yeah, and I think it's going to include some animation. It's going to be different style, and that's what I'm developing now.
Did you say it's called Amazonia?
Yeah, Amazonia.
That sounds very cool and very timely and very relevant to everybody's life, I think, not just people in Seattle.
Post-pandemic, it's really hard to not feel like your life has been touched by Amazon. Yeah.
We've all been touched by Amazon for sure. Yeah. This sounds great. I mean, we could talk all day, but I think it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the BenFilm audience for listening to this lovely conversation with Christina. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine.